There's a kind of loneliness that wears a disguise. It doesn't cry out for help or sit in dark corners. It laughs at the right times, posts cheerful updates, and stays endlessly busy. To the world, it looks like stability, maybe even success, but beneath the calm exterior is a quiet, constant ache that never fully leaves. It's the ache of going through your days unseen, unheard, unmirrored. You can stand in a room full of voices and still feel like a ghost floating through other people's realities. This loneliness isn't about the absence of company, it's about the absence of connection. You can have 1,000 conversations and still feel starved for understanding. You can share space but not safety, speak words but never feel known. It hides behind productivity, behind jokes, behind the sentence, "I've just been busy." And yet, late at night when everything slows, that emptiness whispers the truth, that no one really sees the thoughts you swallow, the tenderness you hide, the world that lives inside you. It's not the loneliness of being alone, it's the loneliness of realizing how invisible you've become while trying so hard to belong. The sensitive observer. People often mistake those who have no friends for being distant, disinterested, or cold. But most of the time, the truth is the opposite. They feel too much. They absorb every shift in a room like a sponge so full it can't hold another drop. They notice the small tremor in someone's voice, the half smile that hides discomfort, the slight delay before a reply. Their hearts are finely tuned instruments, and the world plays them without mercy. It's not that they don't want connection, it's that connection has started to feel dangerous. When you see so deeply, you also sense the insincerity, the small cruelties others overlook. You recognize when someone listens only to reply, not to understand. Over time, your sensitivity begins to feel like a curse, a radar that can't turn off, scanning constantly for shifts in tone and energy. So you begin to pull away. You become quieter, softer, harder to read, not because you dislike people, but because your soul has learned that silence is safer than being misunderstood. You start to crave peace more than company. You start valuing your inner world more than small talk. And in that choice, that quiet retreat, the world begins to label you aloof. But only you know it's not distance you're seeking, it's safety. The quiet retreat. Becoming alone rarely happens all at once. It's not a single decision or dramatic moment of walking away. It's a slow, quiet retreat that happens almost invisibly. One day, you notice you're not sharing as much. You start replying later, cancelling plans more often, staying home when others gather. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that you need rest, but deep down, something in you is already withdrawing from the noise. It begins with small disappointments. People who didn't listen, who laughed when you were serious, who vanished when you needed them the most. You start counting how many times you've been met with silence after opening your heart, and eventually your mind begins to keep score. It whispers, "Why try again?" So you begin to find comfort in your own company. Solitude becomes your refuge, your safest space. No expectations, no judgment, no pretending. At first, it feels peaceful, even liberating. You can think, breathe, exist without performing. But with time, that peace starts to shift. The quiet that once healed you starts to echo. You realize the silence has grown louder than your thoughts, and somewhere between protecting yourself and isolating yourself, you stop noticing when solitude turned into loneliness. When solitude becomes a habit. At first, solitude feels like peace, a kind of quiet freedom you didn't know you needed. You can finally hear your own thoughts, move at your own rhythm, breathe without the weight of constant social performance. The world feels slower, gentler, almost merciful. But as days turn into weeks and weeks into months, something subtle begins to change. The quiet becomes heavier, the silence grows teeth. You start to realize that your thoughts have become your only companions. Every memory replays itself like a movie you can't pause. Every word you once said in vulnerability echoes back at you in 1,000 different tones. You begin to confuse isolation with independence, convincing yourself you chose this peace, even though deep down you know it chose you. And the longer it lasts, the harder it becomes to return, because solitude, once familiar, turns addictive. You know how to be alone now. You know how to protect your energy. But you've also forgotten how to let anyone close enough to touch it. The walls you built to stay safe start to look a lot like home. The brain that learns to fear, connection psychology has a cruel truth. The brain learns from repetition. If enough of your attempts at closeness end in disappointment, the mind quietly rewires itself. Connection becomes a warning sign instead of a comfort. You start to expect rejection before it happens. You read hesitation as disinterest, distance as dislike, silence as proof that you were foolish to try again. It's not about bitterness, it's about protection. Your nervous system remembers pain more vividly than joy, so it builds defenses disguised as logic. Don't text first. Don't share too much. Don't get attached. You start mistaking numbness for strength, but what you're really doing is teaching your heart to flinch from love. Your body stays calm, but your soul tenses every time kindness approaches. You stop trusting good intentions. Even gentle people feel dangerous now because they remind you of what you once hoped for. It's not the world you've stopped believing in. It's yourself, your own ability to be wanted without effort, to be loved without fear. Two versions of the self. Over time, you learn to live with two versions of yourself, one for the world and one that only exists when you're alone. The public self is calm, composed, maybe even confident. It functions, smiles, performs. It knows what to say in meetings, how to sound fine when someone asks, "How are you?" It's the version people praise for being strong and independent. But when the lights dim and the noise fades, another self emerges. The quiet one. The one who misses the sound of someone saying your name with warmth. The one who wonders if you'd still be remembered if you stopped showing up. This self doesn't crave attention, it craves recognition. You begin to notice how exhausting it is to switch between these two worlds. The outer version looks alive but feels hollow. The inner one feels real but unseen. You live in between, half existing, half pretending. And sometimes you catch your reflection and realize the saddest truth of all, that the person everyone admires is just the armor of the person who's still waiting to be understood. The numb phase. There comes a point where even pain begins to fade, not because it's healed, but because your system can't bear to feel it anymore. You stop expecting replies. You stop checking your phone. You stop hoping that anyone will notice your silence. What once hurt now just feels distant, like sound heard through water. People call it emotional detachment, but it's more like emotional survival. You've simply run out of energy to care the way you used to. The tears that once came easily no longer arrive. Instead, there's a steady stillness, a strange calm that feels both peaceful and terrifying. You tell yourself you're fine, that you've accepted things, but deep down, you know this calm isn't peace, it's exhaustion. Your empathy begins to weaken, not because you've lost it, but because no one has reflected it back for too long. The absence of connection starts dulling your edges. You don't feel broken anymore, you feel blank. And sometimes, that emptiness feels safer than the ache that used to live there. Overthinking the world. After spending too long in silence, your mind becomes your loudest companion. Every interaction feels like a puzzle to decode. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A short text feels like a goodbye. You read into every emoji, every pause, every tone, searching for proof of what your fears already decided. You start replaying conversations in your head, not once, but a dozen times, analysing every word you said, every moment you might have seemed too much. You convince yourself you ruined things before they even began. It's not drama, it's hypervigilance born from loneliness. Your brain, once built for connection, now scans for danger instead. You assume the worst so you won't be caught off guard again. But this protection turns into poison. You push people away before they get the chance to pull away. You hide behind politeness, behind logic, behind self-sufficiency, anything that keeps you from having to admit you're scared of being forgotten again. And so, the cycle continues. You long for closeness, then analyze it to death. You crave warmth, but question it when it comes. You're not avoiding love, you're trying to survive it. Time, without witness. When no one shares your days, time begins to lose its texture. The hours stretch out like long corridors with no doors. You stop marking weekends or holidays because they don't feel different anymore. You wake up, you move through the same routines, you sleep, and in between, the days blur into a soft, colourless haze. Loneliness changes the way you experience time. Scientists say that isolation slows perception, that minutes feel heavier, longer. You start to feel it in your bones. Mornings drag. Nights feel endless. You check the clock more often, not because you're busy, but because you can't believe how slowly it's moving. Without someone to share life with, moments lose their meaning. A beautiful sunset feels incomplete when there's no one to turn to and say, "Look." Even joy begins to fade without witness. You realize how deeply human it is to need someone to remember your moments with you. Not to validate them, but to make them real. Because time without witness doesn't just move slower. It starts to feel like it isn't moving at all. The double edge of solitude. Solitude is both medicine and poison. In the beginning, it soothes. It gives you space to breathe, to find your footing after too much chaos. You rediscover small pleasures, quiet mornings, long walks, the stillness of your own company. For a while, it feels like recovery. You think, maybe I was meant to be alone. But slowly, the edges blur. The silence that once healed begins to echo. What used to feel like freedom now feels like floating, unanchored, unseen. You start to miss the noise you once escaped from. You crave laughter, conversation, warmth. Not from everyone, just from someone. That's the paradox of solitude. It can restore your soul or harden it. It depends on whether you chose it or whether the world's neglect chose it for you. One kind builds strength, the other builds walls. You start wondering which version you're living in. Are you protecting your peace or hiding from life? The line becomes harder to see the longer you stay behind it, losing the mirror. Friendship is more than companionship, it's reflection. It's how you see yourself through the eyes of someone who cares. Without that mirror, something inside begins to fade. You start to lose your shape, your sense of who you are beyond your own thoughts. When no one reminds you of your goodness, you start to question if it's still there. When no one listens, your voice begins to sound foreign, even to you. You may still function, still work, still laugh. But you begin to feel like an echo of the person you once were. The world no longer mirrors you back, and without reflection, identity starts to dissolve. You realize how much we rely on others, not just for love, but for self-definition. We become real through recognition. We grow through being seen. And when that mirror disappears, so does a part of your reality. You start to feel like a character fading out of your own story, existing, but no longer vivid. The heart that still notices. And yet, even in the depths of loneliness, something gentle survives. People who have no friends often become the most observant souls. They notice things others overlook. The exhaustion behind a smile, the tremble in someone's voice, the way silence falls when a person feels left out. They see it because they've lived it. This quiet empathy becomes their hidden language. They rarely announce their kindness, they simply offer it in small, invisible ways, holding the door a little longer, listening without interrupting, checking in without fanfare. They move through the world softly, as if trying not to wake anyone's pain. Loneliness sharpens their vision, but softens their touch. They learn to care deeply without needing to be noticed for it. In a way, their solitude turns them into healers, the kind who soothe others quietly, because they understand how heavy it feels to go unnoticed. The world might overlook them, but they rarely overlook the world. Remembering who you were. Before the silence, healing doesn't begin when someone else walks in. It begins the day you decide to meet yourself again. You start to remember the version of you that existed before the world told you to shrink. The one who laughed too loudly, cared too deeply, dreamed without fear. Beneath the quiet you've built, that person is still waiting. At first, it feels strange to look inward with softness. You're so used to guarding your heart that even self-kindness feels unfamiliar. But slowly, you start replacing self-criticism with gentler thoughts. You begin talking to yourself like you would to a friend who's hurting, patient, forgiving, understanding. You realize that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before life made you afraid of being seen. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What happened to me?" That question alone shifts everything. Because once you start remembering your worth, you stop begging for it, relearning connection. The mind that once learned fear can learn trust again. It doesn't happen quickly, it happens quietly. Through moments so small, they almost go unnoticed. You smile back when someone meets your eyes. You answer a message instead of overthinking it. You let someone walk beside you without rushing to disappear. Relearning connection isn't about forcing confidence. It's about allowing life to reach you again. The walls you built start to breathe. You begin to see that not everyone will hurt you, not everyone will leave. There are gentle people, the kind who listen, who stay, who don't need you to be perfect. At first, your body might still flinch from kindness. That's okay. Healing is not a straight line. It's a series of small permissions to hope, to try, to trust again. You start realizing that connection doesn't require performance. It asks only for presence. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, you're ready to show up. Becoming whole. Again, when you stop chasing people, something shifts. The silence that once terrified you starts to feel sacred. You no longer crave noise, you crave peace. You start choosing yourself the way you once chose everyone else. You fill your own gaps instead of waiting for others to complete you. And then something beautiful happens. People who match your peace start appearing. You no longer attract chaos disguised as love. You attract calm, honesty, and depth. Because when you heal your hunger for validation, you stop settling for crumbs. You realize that being alone was never a punishment, it was preparation. Wholeness doesn't mean you never feel lonely again. It means you can sit with it without believing it defines you. It means you can walk through silence and still feel accompanied by your own understanding, your own self-trust. You no longer fear being unseen because you finally see yourself. The gentle return to belonging. One day, unexpectedly, you'll meet someone who looks at you and truly sees you. Not the polished mask, not the guarded calm, but the quiet truth beneath it all. And in their eyes, you'll recognize something familiar. The same ache, the same search, the same longing to be understood. In that moment, you'll realize that loneliness was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of your becoming. Every silent night, every unanswered message, every invisible ache, they were shaping you into someone capable of loving more deeply and seeing more clearly. Connection, you'll learn, isn't about finding perfect people. It's about finding honest ones, souls who can sit with your silence, who don't fear your depth, who find comfort in your presence. And when that happens, it won't feel like fireworks. It'll feel like exhale, soft, steady, and real. Because true friendship doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly and stays. And that's the truest end to loneliness. Not a crowd, but a connection that finally feels like home. Even if no one stands beside you today, you are not forgotten. You are still part of something vast and invisible, the quiet network of hearts learning to heal, to hope, to reconnect. And when the right people find you, as they will, they'll recognize your silence not as emptiness, but as depth. Because you were never broken, you were just becoming.